If you've ever tried to learn investing and immediately felt stuck, you're not alone. You hear phrases like, build a portfolio, and suddenly it feels like you're supposed to pick the right things, in the right amounts, at the right time, without really knowing what any of those words mean. And the more you look, the more options appear. Funds, sectors, strategies, balanced versus aggressive, and 100 different opinions that all sound confident. It creates a very specific kind of hesitation. Not because you're lazy, but because you don't want to do something wrong and regret it later. Here's the calm truth. A beginner portfolio does not need to be complicated to be solid. In fact, complexity is usually what causes beginners to stop. In this video, I'm going to make this finally feel simple. You'll understand what a portfolio is actually for, what simple really means, and how beginners can build a structure that feels stable enough to stick with. Quick framing before we start. This isn't financial advice, and it's not a prediction about what will happen next. This is a calm, educational explanation of a beginner portfolio. What it is, what it's supposed to do, and why a simple structure is often the most practical starting point. There are no shortcuts here, no hype, no promises, and no pressure to act quickly. The point is understanding, because when people struggle with investing early on, it's rarely because they were missing a clever trick. It's usually because they never had a clear mental picture of what they were building. They were handed ingredients without being shown the recipe. So what we're doing today is building that picture. Slowly, in plain language, with everyday comparisons, and with the kind of clarity that lets you make calmer decisions over time. In a moment, you'll see that the simplest portfolio isn't simple because it's lazy. It's simple because it's designed to be survivable in real life. To make this easy to follow, I'll break it into 3 parts. First, we'll define what a portfolio actually is, in a way that makes sense even if you've never invested before. We'll talk about what job it's supposed to do for a beginner and what it is not supposed to do. That's where most confusion begins. Second, we'll talk about what makes a portfolio simple and why that simplicity is not a weakness. We'll use a couple of clear mental models and we'll walk through realistic beginner scenarios so it feels real, not theoretical. This is where you'll see the difference between what people assume is happening and what's actually happening. Third, we'll translate that understanding into calm, behavior-based guidance. Not a list of tactics, not a platform tutorial, just principles you can use to reduce friction, avoid unnecessary decisions, and stay consistent over time. And throughout the video, I'll keep circling back to one question that matters more than it seems. What can I realistically stick with? Because in a moment, you'll realize that the best beginner portfolio is often the one that protects you from your own future overthinking. Let's start with the core idea. A portfolio is not a collection of good picks. That's the first mental shift. A portfolio is a system. It's a structure. It's a way of holding investments together so they behave as a group, not as isolated bets. When beginners think a portfolio is a list of picks, every choice feels heavy. If one thing drops, it feels like you chose wrong. If one thing rises, it feels like you must do more of it. The whole experience becomes emotionally loud. A better way to understand a portfolio is this. A portfolio is a plan for how you want your money to behave over time. That's it. Not what you want it to do next week, not what you hope happens this year. How you want it to behave over long periods when life is busy and you're not watching the news every day. So what does a beginner need from that behavior? A beginner usually needs 3 things. They need broad exposure, so they're not dependent on one narrow outcome. They need resilience, meaning the portfolio can handle messy periods without demanding constant changes. And they need simplicity, meaning the structure is easy enough to understand that they don't abandon it the first time it feels uncertain. Now, there's one word that comes up immediately here, and it's often explained badly. Diversification. Diversification sounds like a technical strategy, but in plain English, it just means this. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And the reason that matters is not because you're trying to maximize returns. It's because you're trying to reduce the chance that one bad outcome ruins your entire experience. Here's an everyday way to see it. Imagine you're starting a new job. You wouldn't want your entire life to depend on a single paycheck that could disappear overnight with no warning. So you build stability. You keep some savings. You avoid making your whole life fragile. A beginner portfolio is the same idea applied to investing. It's a structure that tries to avoid fragility. Now here's where simplicity comes in. Most beginners think diversification means owning many different things. But that's not necessarily true. Often the simplest way to diversify is to own a small number of broad components that already contain variety inside them. Think of it like food. You can try to get nutrients by buying 30 separate ingredients and measuring everything perfectly. Or you can choose a few balanced meals that already include the basics you need. A simple portfolio is like choosing balanced meals. It's not perfect, it's practical, and practical is what survives. Now let's talk about what a simple portfolio is in concept. Without naming products or platforms, a simple beginner portfolio usually has a small number of broad building blocks. Not 10, not 20, usually a few. Each building block has a role. One block is focused on long-term growth, one block is focused on stability. Sometimes there's a third block that adds a small amount of extra balance, but the point is not the exact number. The point is that each piece has a job. Here's the second mental model. A portfolio is like a team. You don't build a strong team by picking 10 people who all do the same job. You build a strong team by picking a few people with different roles that complement each other. In a portfolio, those roles might look like this. Some parts grow faster over long periods but can feel bumpy along the way. Other parts grow more slowly but tend to feel steadier. When you combine them, the group behavior can become easier to tolerate. And that word, tolerate, is not accidental. Because the number one problem beginners face is not that they chose a portfolio that was wrong. It's that they chose a portfolio they couldn't tolerate. They built something that looked impressive on paper, but felt stressful in real life. So when the market moved, or when life got busy, or when they saw a scary headline, they didn't have a calm framework for what was happening. They had anxiety and guesses. In a moment, we'll make this feel more real with scenarios. But before that, there's another misunderstanding we should clear up. Many people assume the goal of a beginner portfolio is performance, but a more realistic goal is endurance. A beginner portfolio should be designed to help you stay in the game, because time is one of the most powerful forces in investing. And time only works if you give it space. If your portfolio makes you panic, you interrupt time. If it makes you overthink, you interrupt time. If it makes you constantly change directions, you interrupt time. So the simplest portfolio for beginners is often the one that reduces the number of reasons you'd quit. That's the core concept. Simple does not mean naive. It means intentional. It means fewer moving parts. It means fewer decisions. It means less temptation to react. And it means you can explain your own setup to yourself in 1 or 2 calm sentences. That last part matters more than it seems, because when you can explain it, you can trust it. And when you can trust it, you can stick with it. One more important idea before we move on. A portfolio is not a one-time decision. It's a repeating behavior. Most people imagine investing as a moment. I pick the best thing and I'm done. But investing is usually more like brushing your teeth. Small, repeated actions over time. And for repeated behaviors, simplicity wins. Complexity adds friction. Friction adds delays. Delays turn into long gaps. And long gaps often become quitting. So when we say the simplest portfolio, we're really asking, what is the simplest structure that helps a beginner keep showing up? In a moment, we'll walk through the difference between what beginners assume they need to do and what actually tends to work better in real life. Let's make this feel real. Here are 2 beginner scenarios that happen all the time. Scenario 1. You're 24. You've got a job. You want to start investing, but you don't have a lot of mental space for it. You already have enough decisions in your life. Work, rent, food, social life. Maybe debt, maybe family responsibilities. You're willing to be consistent, but you can't handle constant monitoring. So you start researching, and you find 2 paths. Path A is a complex portfolio with lots of components. It's built from several categories, each with a different purpose. It sounds sophisticated. It also comes with a problem you don't notice at first. It creates constant questions. When one component dips, you wonder if it's broken. When another rises, you wonder if you should shift more into it. When a headline appears, you wonder which component is supposed to protect you. The portfolio might not be wrong, but it is mentally expensive. Path B is a simpler structure, fewer pieces, broad exposure, clear roles. It doesn't require you to become an expert to keep it running. Now here's the contrast. What people assume is happening is that Path A is better because it is more detailed. What's actually happening is that Path A increases the number of opportunities to second-guess yourself. And second-guessing is not just an emotional issue. It becomes a practical problem because it changes your behavior. When behavior becomes reactive, consistency breaks. And consistency breaking is one of the quietest ways people lose years. That's the first proof. The best portfolio is not the smartest looking one, it's the one that supports steady behavior. Scenario 2. You're 29. You've tried investing before, but you stopped. Not because you hated the idea, but because it felt confusing. You bought something, it dropped, and you didn't know whether that was normal. You didn't have a calm frame for volatility, which simply means up and down movement. You started checking constantly. You started feeling uneasy. Eventually you sold, just to stop thinking about it. Now you want to start again. You don't want perfection. You want a setup that feels stable enough to hold through uncertainty. This is where a simple portfolio becomes powerful, because it can be explained. When you have a few broad building blocks with clear roles, you can say something like this. This part is for long-term growth, and it will be bumpy sometimes. This part is for stability, so the whole thing doesn't feel like a roller coaster, and that explanation becomes a psychological anchor. It's not a promise, it's a plan. Now let's add a time-based illustration, because time is where most people get confused. Imagine a simple timeline. Year 1. You start investing. You add consistently. Nothing dramatic happens. You feel like you're not making progress. This is where many beginners get disappointed because they expect the first year to feel meaningful. But in reality, the first year is mostly about building the habit and the system. Year 3. You've been consistent long enough that the system starts to feel normal. You've experienced a few ups and downs. You didn't quit. Your confidence grows, not because everything went smoothly, but because you survived normal uncertainty. Year 7. Now, even if you're not thinking about investing every day, you've built a pattern. Your portfolio has had time to do its job. You're no longer relying on motivation, you're relying on a structure that runs. The point of that timeline is not to suggest outcomes, it's to show what changes over time. What changes is you. Your relationship with uncertainty changes. And the portfolio you choose can either support that development or sabotage it. Here's another mental model to make this clearer. Think of a simple portfolio like a ship with a steady course. The ocean will not be calm all the time. The waves will rise and fall. But a well-built ship doesn't change direction every time the water moves. It stays on course. A complex portfolio can feel like a ship where you constantly adjust the sails, change the route, and argue with yourself about whether you should even be on the water. Again, it might not be technically wrong, but it increases the chance that you'll abandon the journey. Now let's talk about a common belief that holds beginners back. Many people assume they need the best portfolio, but the real goal is a good enough portfolio that you can stick with. What people assume is that the right portfolio removes uncertainty. What's actually happening is that uncertainty is part of investing, and the right portfolio helps you handle it without making impulsive changes. That's why simplicity is powerful. It doesn't remove uncertainty. It removes unnecessary complexity on top of uncertainty. And those are different. Uncertainty is the market moving around. Complexity is you adding extra layers of decisions that make that movement harder to tolerate. Now, another contrast. What people assume is that a simple portfolio means you're missing out. What's actually happening is that beginners usually miss out the most when they stop and restart, chasing new ideas. The cost is not visible because it's not a fee you see on a screen. It's time lost, it's momentum lost, it's confidence lost, and it's the emotional exhaustion of constantly feeling behind. A simple portfolio protects you from that cycle. One more important point before we move to application. A simple beginner portfolio is not an identity. It's not a statement that you'll always be simple. It's a phase. It's the training wheels stage in the healthiest sense. And training wheels aren't embarrassing. They're what make the early stage safe enough to continue. In a moment, we'll translate this into calm guidance you can actually use, without turning it into an overwhelming list of tasks. Now let's talk about how to apply this in a way that feels settling, not stressful. The first step is not picking components. The first step is deciding the purpose. A beginner portfolio is not built to impress anyone. It is built to support consistency. So ask yourself this quiet question. What structure would make it easiest for me to keep going, even when I feel uncertain? That's the foundation. Now here's the second step. Reduce decisions. Most beginners don't fail because they chose the wrong thing. They fail because they created a system that asked too much of them. Too many moving pieces, too many rules, too much monitoring. So a simple portfolio should be explainable in plain language. It should sound like something you can say without anxiety. Something like, I'm using a small number of broad building blocks, and I'm adding consistently over time. That's calm, that's stable. Now, third step, expect normal movement. This is a behavioral rule, not a market rule. If you start investing and you expect a smooth line upward, you will interpret normal volatility as danger. Volatility just means the value moves up and down. It does not automatically mean something is broken. So instead, rehearse this idea now, while you're calm. There will be periods where it feels like nothing is working. There will be periods where I feel uncertain, and that is normal. This matters more than it seems, because your expectations shape your reactions. If you expect normal turbulence, you don't need to panic when it arrives. Fourth step. Automate your behavior mentally, even if you don't automate anything technically. What I mean is, remove the need to decide every time. If every month you sit down and ask, should I invest this month, you've created a decision point that can be interrupted by mood, headlines, or fear. A simple portfolio mindset says, this is part of my routine, like paying a bill, like saving, like showing up for something that matters. Fifth step, avoid complexity creep. Complexity creep is when you start simple, but slowly add new pieces because of something you heard, something you saw, or something you felt. It usually sounds reasonable. This might diversify me more. This might protect me more. This might improve things. But often what's actually happening is that you're trying to soothe uncertainty by adding new decisions. So set a calm rule for yourself. For a beginner, the goal is not constant improvement. The goal is consistency with a clear structure. You can always learn more later. You can always refine later. But right now, your job is to build a foundation you can keep. Sixth step. Give yourself permission to be boring. This is surprisingly difficult for beginners because boring can feel like you're not doing enough. But boring is often what long-term systems look like. A simple portfolio is designed to be a background process. It's not supposed to create daily excitement. It's supposed to create long-term participation. And participation is powerful because it compounds. Not in a magical way, in a time and consistency way. Now here's a small reframe that can help. Instead of asking, is this the best portfolio? Ask, is this a portfolio I can stick with through a normal year of uncertainty? Because if the answer is yes, you've already done something most beginners never do. You've built something that can survive. And survival is what creates progress. Before we finish, here's one last retention loop to hold on to. In a moment, I'm going to summarize this in a simple way that you can remember without notes, and I'll tell you what the next video will focus on. So you keep building this foundation calmly. Let's bring this together. A beginner portfolio is not a test of intelligence. It's a tool for consistency. The simplest portfolio for beginners is simple for a reason. It reduces decisions. It reduces the urge to react. It gives you broad exposure without demanding expert-level management. And it helps you stay invested long enough for time to matter. If you only remember a few ideas, remember these. A portfolio is a system, not a list of picks. Simplicity is not weakness, it's durability. And the goal is not perfection, it's endurance. You don't need to rush this. You don't need to know everything. And you don't need to make it complicated to make it real. A calm foundation beats an anxious optimal plan almost every time, because the calm foundation is the one you're more likely to keep. In the next video, we'll talk about something that quietly stops most people from building wealth over time, even when they have a reasonable plan. It's not about intelligence, and it's not about secret strategies. It's usually about a pattern of behavior that feels harmless in the moment, but compounds into years of delay. Once you see it clearly, it becomes easier to avoid and easier to stay steady. For now, the main win is this. If investing has felt confusing, it doesn't have to. When the structure is simple, the path feels calmer. And when the path feels calmer, you're far more likely to stay on it.